We do have breaking news for you this afternoon from the FreightWaves headquarters. It was announced this afternoon actually by FedEx. They sent out a press release saying they will not renew the FedEx Express U.S. domestic contract with Amazon.com. This is huge news. I'm joined by FreightWaves CEO Craig Fuller. And Craig, they've been going back and forth, and finally FedEx made this announcement. What does this mean?
So it's significant in the sense that Amazon is the world's largest customer of shipping services. And for FedEx Express to come out and say that they're not renewing the contract is suggesting a couple of things. One is they don't find it in their interest to do business with Amazon. It could be price, not seeing the Amazon contract or not knowing how that contract is priced. It very could just be an economic game where they just don't think that Amazon is priced appropriately to their network. But it also could be more fundamental that there may be concerns about competition. So over the last couple of years, we've seen Amazon, and we've covered it deeply, that Amazon's moving to take over more of their network and pull business away from other carriers.
They made a point in the press release to say, this is not significant. Like you said, it's like 1.3% of their business is what they do for Amazon. But is this a move for FedEx to say, hey, we want to be bigger in the e-commerce game?
Well, I think FedEx is already really big in the e-commerce game. And I think you can actually credit Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, of actually helping, if not being the most influential person in e-commerce, helping to create the opportunity for e-commerce to exist. And so the business model of FedEx has really perfected JIT and on-demand transportation and expedite and express services for really the last couple of decades. And Amazon has been a core beneficiary of that. But I think this is certainly a turn, and at least a public turn, in the relationship between the two companies.
Will more companies come out after this and say, bye Amazon, we're done?
The question is how many companies are big enough and insulated enough to be able to basically do the Heisman to Amazon. I mean, it's a pretty bold move to be able to go on record saying they're not going to do business with the world's largest shipper. But it's also, I think, a testament to FedEx's confidence in the broader market. Now, if you think about just game theorying this out, from FedEx's perspective, it's a really smart move. And the reason I think it's really, really smart is they have drawn a line in the sand that they're not doing business with Amazon. And by saying that, they're basically sending a very clear message to Amazon's other competitors like Walmart or Target that they are not going to give favorable nation to Amazon any longer. And because of that, I think they're actually going to win some business from some of the other parcel carriers that maybe haven't come out and said that.
Could this ultimately hurt Amazon, say, around the Christmas time? I mean, that's an excess of packages are coming and you have one less person out there moving your stuff. Could this potentially hurt Amazon?
Well, it certainly will force Amazon to build more lift capacity. So if you look at the actual announcement, the particular announcement that FedEx made was around their express unit, which is their air freight unit, or even though a lot of that moves on the ground, it's still their overnight unit. And it's really what most people, when you say the word FedEx, that's what they think about. It's the word FedEx is a term of overnighting, even regardless of what carrier. And that's what most people, when they say, I'm going to FedEx something, that's what they're really thinking about, is that overnight shipment. It shows up the next day. Even though a lot of that freight goes on the ground, a substantial of it is in the air now. And certainly Amazon is going to lose a lot of lift capacity, the ability to move cargo overnight. And I think what this means for Amazon is just going to force them to respond by building up more infrastructure. Although I don't think that Amazon has been sitting idly. I mean, if you look at they've gone out and are buying, I believe the estimates are about 40,000 trailers over the next couple of years. They've added 20,000 on-demand vans that they bought from, I believe it was Mercedes-Benz or Freightliner, the Sprinter vans. They have added...
In each city, they have now those spots and drops, and in Whole Foods. Was this all a move? You're saying that they kind of are wanting to be more self-sufficient? They want to...
Well, we covered the article on Amazon a few months back, and John Paul wrote an article about freight.amazon.com, and there was an interesting quote that was actually sent to us from a former executive at Amazon who now works in the supply chain industry, but no longer for Amazon, that said the perspective that Amazon is building up their own network to cost is an incorrect view. That actually what Amazon is doing is Amazon is so concerned about getting capacity that they don't want to run out. And this is an example of if they don't want, in Amazon's case, they don't want to be, I don't know if held hostage is the right word, because I don't think FedEx is doing that, but they don't want to be dependent upon the other carriers, or anybody for that matter, to look after their own interest. And so I think what's happened is that Amazon, because it's fast growing, has been forced and had the opportunity to build up its own network of aircraft. They're an MVOCC, which is a maritime shipper, and they've registered for that for some period of time. They now have added their own on-demand trucking operations and digital freight brokerage, if you will. And so they're moving all avenues, and now they've gone out and chartered a bunch of aircraft. They have dedicated aircraft to their network, so they're certainly building out that incremental capacity.
Has Amazon helped or hurt the freight industry?
That's a perspective that I don't know that it's a judgment call. I don't think you can argue either way. I should say, you can make arguments on help or hurt. I think at the end of the day, innovation is a fact that everyone is faced with, and I think you have to give Amazon credit for perfecting a model of using their own demand, their own incremental demand, to basically build out their own logistics network. And they've done it at a scale we've never seen before. Walmart has the largest trucking fleet in the US, and they've had this for decades. But Amazon has gone and actually taken it further by adding air capacity and adding warehouse capacity around the US and around the world. So they're certainly taking it to the next level. And I don't think you can judge it, good or bad, and you can make arguments on both sides. It's a fact. And I think every company that's in transportation, like it or not, is going to have to deal with the fact that Amazon is pushing the envelope. They're going to be aggressive, and they're going to make decisions that are in their best interest. And I don't think you can fault them for that.
And going back to the original press release, the big news that FedEx announced they will not renew their contract with Amazon.com, their FedEx Express U.S. domestic contract. Do you think we'll see another press release like this coming from UPS or someone else soon?
I would hate to speculate that. I think, my view, just from a sort of an image standpoint or a public, is FedEx is the more aggressive company, and I don't mean that in a bad way. That's not a judgment call against them. I just think that they tend to be, it's still a founder-driven company. Even as big as it is, Fred Smith created the e-commerce overnight freight business. It's still heavily influenced by that sort of aggressive, high-growth, high-energy business. UPS is far more conservative in their approach, and have historically been. I would be surprised, even if UPS pulls back, I would frankly be surprised if they came out and said anything like this. But who knows? I mean, this is a new age. We're now seeing a company as big as FedEx publicly come out and effectively say, we're not doing business with the world's largest shipper. Now, what's interesting about that is that you go back and look at the history of FedEx 20 years ago. The U.S. Parcel Service, USPS, and U.S. Postal Service, I guess it is, and FedEx were almost at war with one another. The idea that Fred Smith was wanting to, didn't like this sort of favorable nation that the U.S. Postal Service had on transportation services. But it was about 20 years ago that FedEx became the air provider of the U.S. Postal Service's overnight business. So when you ship overnight and it ends up on an aircraft, it's FedEx that's providing that service for you. You don't know it. The postal guy still shows up at the door, but that line haul service was FedEx. And that was a $7 billion contract, and it was massive 20 years ago. And it was sort of this interesting development where FedEx, who had been very outspoken against the sort of the monopoly that the U.S. Postal Service had on parcel, had come out and basically had all of a sudden secured that contract. And I believe they had secured it from Emory or one of the other small bulk air carriers.
So they've always been kind of a rebel, you could say, in this.
I mean, rebel, or they defined innovator.
Yeah.
I mean, Fred Smith, dating back, they're 1970s, so 50 years ago. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I'd have to do some math, and it's late on a Friday, as you can tell. So, but this is a company that Fred Smith was the original innovator in e-commerce. And FedEx's business model predated the internet, and it predated Fred Smith had this vision that FedEx would that people would have overnight freight. And sort of the urban legend, I believe there's a lot of truth to this, has been written and well discussed, is that Fred Smith actually wrote this thesis in a college class, and he got a C because the professor thought it was the dumbest idea ever, that no one would ever, that a overnight network would never be sustainable. But he went out and built it. He believed in his vision. Interesting enough, is Fred Smith is, I think, the great-grandson of the founder of Greyhound bus services. So transportation's been in his blood. And then what he saw was the opportunity to deliver overnight freight, and he built this substantial network. And I think in some ways, I wouldn't say the baton has been passed on, because I don't think that's fair to FedEx, because they certainly are still the most, or among the most dominant carriers in there. But I think what's happened is that Amazon has created this entire ecosystem of owning all aspects of the transportation that goes, or all aspects of the experience of online ordering. You could argue online cataloging, online ordering, to fulfillment, and really all those layers in between. And that's a new turn.
And I know you have two very intelligent guys on staff who actually have been following this closely and tracking it with both, is it Seth Holm that's doing it and Kevin Hill?
Yeah, so, John Paul had written a story about 2 months ago that freight.amazon.com was something that Amazon had quietly been creating. And we had a couple sources in the industry that told us about it, so it was interesting. John Paul wrote the story and went and did this analysis about the cost of what Amazon was charging for third-party freight services and third-party truck services against benchmark indexes, in this case was DAT, and just what the broader market was. And the view that John Paul had concluded in his analysis was that Amazon was significantly undercutting the market prices. He wrote this article. Amazon disputed the facts. I think they took exception to the fact that JP and FreightWaves had said that Amazon was significantly undercutting the market. And they also didn't feel that was properly reflective of what they were doing with their network. We and JP and us have stood behind that analysis, but we thought that we should go deeper. And so we asked Kevin Hill and Seth to go in and analyze the impact of this freight.amazon.com, and more importantly, get a perspective on how the trucking market feels and thinks and anticipates what Amazon is doing. Plus some research around when Amazon enters a new market, what does that do to the other parts of the market?
Now, this story, and of course the story that he was referring to that John Paul wrote, can all be found on FreightWaves.com. And of course, we'll hear from Seth and Kevin Hill when they talk about this deeper dive they took into this story. And that can be read online too.